The rain poured heavily over New York City that Friday, transforming the bustling streets of the financial district into rivers. Logan Smith, a 35-year-old tech entrepreneur, sat on the 20th floor of his company's headquarters, looking out the window as the storm raged. He had been staring at the same view for over an hour, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in the endless whirl of meetings, negotiations, and decisions that had dominated his week. His luxurious office, complete with its glass walls and minimalist furniture, felt cold, impersonal, despite the grand skyline that lay beyond. Logan had everything a man could want: a successful business, wealth, and recognition. Yet, there was an emptiness inside him, a void that success had done nothing to fill. He glanced down at his watch, a symbol of his achievements, its gleaming surface reflecting the dim light from the overcast sky. The hands seemed to mock him with their relentless ticking, a reminder of the time slipping away. Logan had always believed that success came with sacrifice. But as the years passed, he began to wonder if he had sacrificed too much of what truly mattered. He ran his fingers through his dark hair, sighed, and stood up from his desk. It was time to go home, to escape the clutches of his corporate world for just a few hours. He stepped into the elevator and descended to the lobby, where his driver, always punctual, was waiting. The man held out an umbrella as Logan stepped outside, ready to face the storm. But as they approached the revolving door, something caught Logan's attention. He froze, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a figure sitting on the sidewalk outside the building. It was a young woman, drenched from head to toe, her clothes clinging to her skin as the rain poured relentlessly. She seemed unaware, or perhaps indifferent, to the downpour around her. Logan hesitated, his gaze lingering on the woman. She was sitting next to a small box of pastries and a few scattered drawings that were rapidly being ruined by the rain. It wasn't unusual to see homeless people on the streets, but there was something about her presence that struck a chord within him. He should have just passed by, like everyone else. He should have turned back to the safety of his car, to the warmth and comfort of his perfectly ordered life. But for some reason, Logan felt an inexplicable pull. "Take me home," Logan told his driver, his voice firm yet uncertain. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked towards the woman. As he approached, the sound of the storm seemed to fade into the background. The clatter of the city's chaos, the honking of horns, and the murmur of conversation disappeared until all Logan could hear was the rain's steady rhythm. He stopped a few feet away from her, unsure of what to say. The woman looked up at him, her large brown eyes meeting his with a gaze that was a mix of distrust and curiosity. There was something about those eyes, something raw and unfiltered, that drew him in, making him forget the world around them. "Are you okay?" Logan asked, his voice raised slightly to be heard over the storm. The woman tilted her head, a hint of sarcasm in her voice as she replied, "Oh, I'm just peachy. I absolutely love getting soaked while my drawings melt away." Her tone was biting, but there was something familiar in her words, a bitter humor that Logan recognized in himself. He couldn't help but smile. Despite the odd situation, he had been surrounded by people his entire life, but no one had ever spoken to him quite like that. It was refreshing in a strange way. "My name is Logan," he said, extending a hand. "And yours?" The woman glanced at his outstretched hand, then back at him, her gaze weighing him carefully. She didn't take his hand, but her lips twitched slightly, as if trying to fight a smile. "Zara," she replied simply. "But I'm guessing you already know that." Logan raised an eyebrow, unsure if it was a joke or something else. "Zara, nice to meet you," he said, still trying to make sense of the situation. "What are you doing out here? I mean, it's not exactly a pleasant day for, well, anything." She shrugged, her shoulders shaking as the cold seemed to settle deeper into her bones. "I'm selling pastries and drawings. Thought I'd make a few bucks before the storm hit." She glanced down at the soggy pastries and the now ruined drawings, the corners curling from the rain. "Guess the storm won." "Huh." Logan stared at the mess before him, his mind racing. He had grown up with everything he could have ever wanted: wealth, success, and opportunities. But it was clear that Zara didn't share his privileges. She didn't seem to care about the rules, about the polished expectations that defined his world. She was real in a way Logan hadn't encountered in a long time. He looked back at her, the moment stretching out longer than he expected. "Listen," he began, hesitating for a moment. "There's a cafe nearby. How about we get something warm while the rain passes?" Zara looked him up and down, sizing him up, as though debating whether to trust him. Logan knew what she saw: a well-dressed man, clearly a corporate type, probably just another arrogant executive who didn't care about anyone but himself. But as she met his gaze again, something softened in her expression. It wasn't a warmth, but an understanding, a recognition, perhaps, that he wasn't just another nameless businessman in the city. "Fine," Zara said, her tone more neutral than before. "But I'm not going to let you pay for my coffee." Logan nodded, the corners of his lips curving upward. "Deal." They walked together to the nearby cafe, the rain still falling in sheets around them. Zara was quiet for most of the walk, lost in her thoughts, while Logan couldn't help but steal glances at her. She was younger than him, but there was something undeniably mature about her. Her life, it seemed, had already been shaped by hardship and struggle. Logan couldn't imagine what it had been like for her to end up here, on the street, with nothing but soggy pastries and a few crumpled drawings. And yet, despite the circumstances, Zara seemed oddly at peace with it. When they reached the cafe, they found a quiet table by the window. The warm glow of the cafe provided a stark contrast to the storm outside. As they sat, Zara ordered a black coffee, and Logan, almost on instinct, asked for a cappuccino. The silence between them stretched for a while, until Zara finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. "So, what's your deal?" she asked, glancing up at him. "You don't seem like the type to just stop and talk to someone like me. What's your angle?" Logan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't really know, to be honest," he said, feeling a rare vulnerability creep into his voice. "I guess I just saw you sitting there, in the rain, and I don't know. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." Zara's eyes flickered with something, maybe skepticism, or maybe recognition, but she didn't press him for more. Instead, she took a sip of her coffee, and for the first time since he'd met her, Logan saw a glimpse of something else in her eyes: hope. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough to make him realize that, in some strange way, they both needed this encounter. The storm outside, the serendipity of it all. It felt like fate had brought them together, for reasons Logan couldn't quite understand. But as the minutes passed, he began to suspect that perhaps this chance meeting would change both of their lives forever. And little did he know, the storm outside was only the beginning. Logan hesitated, his fingers still wrapped around the handle of his umbrella. The rain had turned the street into a blur of grays and blues, the city's frantic pace unaffected by the downpour. But something about the woman sitting on the sidewalk caught his attention. She wasn't seeking shelter like most of the pedestrians running for cover. Instead, she was sitting still, almost as if the storm didn't matter at all. Her head was tilted slightly upward, her eyes closed, and her shoulders seemed to carry an unspoken weight, as though she were deep in thought. Beside her was a small box of pastries, some drawings scattered across the pavement, completely soaked, their colors bleeding into the rain-soaked ground. Logan's driver opened the car door, ready to whisk him away, but Logan hesitated. He wasn't sure why, but something in the stillness of the moment pulled at him. Without thinking too much, he told the driver to leave and began walking toward the woman, his footsteps soft on the wet pavement. As he approached, the woman's eyes flickered open. Her gaze was sharp, but there was a flicker of something else: mistrust, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. She looked up at him with large brown eyes, her lips curling into a half smile, half sneer. "You're not one of those corporate sharks looking for a photo op, are you?" she said, her voice louder than expected, cutting through the storm's noise. Logan couldn't help but be taken aback. The sarcasm in her tone wasn't what he had expected. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'm just curious. You seem out of place here, in the rain." The woman raised an eyebrow, her eyes scanning him briefly, assessing his expensive suit. his polished shoes, and his perfectly tousled hair. A wry smile tugged at her lips as she gestured vaguely toward her drenched clothes. "Oh, you're right," she said, voice dripping with irony. "I love getting soaked while my artwork melts away." Logan felt a tug of sympathy at her words, but he didn't know how to respond to her sarcasm. "I'm Logan," he said, extending a hand despite her obvious reluctance. "And you are?" She looked at his hand for a moment, then back up at him. "Zara," she replied curtly. She didn't take his hand, but instead returned her attention to the box of pastries. "And I'm having a wonderful time getting soaked and watching my dreams wash away," she added, her voice tinged with bitterness. Logan stood there for a moment, uncertain of what to do next. He had met hundreds of people in his life, many of them in far more prestigious circumstances. Yet, there was something about this woman, sitting there in the rain, that seemed different. Her spirit, though clearly tested, was not yet broken. Another thunderclap rumbled through the sky, followed by a flash of lightning that briefly illuminated the streets. Zara shivered visibly from the cold, and Logan noticed how her shoulders hunched instinctively as if she were trying to hold herself together against the storm. Without thinking, he stepped closer. "You should come inside," he said, his voice a little softer now. "There's a cafe just around the corner. It's warm inside." Zara looked at him for a long moment, studying him with that same mix of distrust and curiosity in her eyes. Logan didn't know if it was the storm or something deeper that had convinced her. But after a pause, she nodded. "Fine," she said, "but just so you know, I'm not some helpless damsel looking to be saved." Logan smiled, relieved. "I didn't think you were," he replied, motioning for her to follow him. They walked through the rain, their footsteps splashing in the growing puddles. Logan didn't mind the wetness. It felt oddly freeing, a welcome contrast to the sterile world he usually inhabited. He led Zara into the cozy little cafe, a warm haven from the storm outside. The moment they stepped inside, the rich aroma of coffee and baked goods wrapped around them like a comforting blanket. They found a small table by the window where they could watch the rain continue to pour down. Logan sat across from Zara, silently grateful for the silence that had settled between them. She was no longer the sarcastic stranger in the rain. Now, she seemed more real, more human. She had removed her soaked jacket and draped it over the chair, revealing a colorful scarf around her neck that added a touch of vibrancy to her otherwise disheveled appearance. "What's the story with the drawings?" Logan asked, breaking the silence. His voice was casual, but there was a genuine curiosity behind it. Zara glanced out the window, her gaze distant. "They were supposed to be part of an art show," she said, her voice softer now. "But that's over now. The rain, it's ruined everything." She paused, her eyes narrowing as if weighing whether she should continue. "Not that it matters. I'm just trying to get by." Logan leaned forward, trying to understand. "I don't know much about art, but it sounds like something you really care about." Zara laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Caring doesn't always save you from the rain," she said, her tone dark. "Sometimes, you just lose." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Logan didn't know what else to say. He had been privileged all his life, sheltered from the storms that people like Zara faced. But something about her struggle, the way she spoke of loss without bitterness, struck a chord deep within him. "So," Logan said, attempting to change the subject, "what happens now? Do you just pack up and go home? Or?" Zara's lips curled into a slight smile. "I don't know yet," she replied, her tone thoughtful. "But for now, I'm just trying to stay dry and figure it out. One step at a time." Logan nodded, understanding. For the first time in a long while, he felt an unfamiliar sensation, empathy. It was a strange feeling for him, but also one that felt important. As they sat there, the storm raged on outside, but inside the cafe, time seemed to slow down. For a brief moment, Logan allowed himself to forget about his business, his responsibilities, and the weight of his success. In the presence of this stranger, this woman whose life was in turmoil, he found something unexpected, a glimpse of the human connection he had been missing, what neither of them knew yet. However, was that this encounter would change both their lives forever. Logan stood there, feeling somewhat out of place, as the woman's sharp gaze pierced through him. Her sarcasm wasn't unkind, but it was clear she was used to the world turning a blind eye to her. The way she looked at him made it clear she didn't trust easily, and she wasn't interested in small talk. Yet, there was a curiosity in her eyes, too, as though she had never encountered someone who didn't treat her like a problem to be solved or a spectacle to be ignored. "I'm Logan," he said, trying to soften his voice. Feeling the weight of the awkwardness between them, he extended a hand toward her, though she didn't move to take it at first. Instead, she eyed him for a long moment, before finally speaking. "I'm Zura," she said simply, her voice tinged with both reluctance and a hint of amusement. "And no, I don't need your charity, if that's what you're offering." Logan smiled faintly, lowering his hand. "I wasn't offering charity, just a bit of warmth," he replied. "There's a cafe just around the corner. You can sit out here and get drenched, or you can come with me and have a warm drink until the rain dies down. Your call." Zara hesitated, glancing down at the soaked pastries and the drawings that were now ruined by the rain. Her lips tightened for a moment, the weight of the moment settling in. There was a silent struggle behind her eyes, one that Logan could sense but couldn't fully understand. "Why do you care?" she asked, finally meeting his gaze again, this time softer but still guarded. "You don't know me. You don't even know why I'm out here." Logan looked at her carefully, not for the first time noticing the tiredness in her eyes. Something about her made him want to know more, something that went beyond her disheveled appearance and the defiant tone in her voice. There was a quiet strength to her, like someone who had weathered storms far greater than the one raging outside. "I don't know you," he said quietly, "but I'd like to. You seem like you got a story to tell." Zara stared at him for a moment longer, as if trying to figure out whether he was genuine or simply another wealthy man looking to soothe his conscience. But for some reason, perhaps because of the way the rain made the world feel quieter, she nodded. "All right, but I'm not going to pretend to be impressed by your fancy cafe." "Okay," she said, the corner of her mouth lifting in a small, teasing smile. "I'm more of a corner diner type." Logan chuckled softly, relieved by her willingness to accept his offer. "I can manage that," he said. "I promise not to bore you with talk about stocks or mergers. Just a warm cup of coffee. No strings attached." They walked together through the rain, side by side, though there was still a palpable distance between them. Zara was an enigma, one Logan couldn't quite unravel, and he didn't rush to fill the silence. It felt different walking with her, almost like they were both shedding the roles the world had forced upon them. The sleek businessman and the wet, disheveled artist were, for once, just two people, finding refuge from a storm. The cafe they entered was warm, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. It was a small, quiet place, with mismatched furniture and low lighting. Zara found a seat by the window, still dripping wet, but now visibly more at ease. Logan joined her, placing a cup of coffee in front of her and a tea for himself. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their drinks, letting the world outside disappear. The storm raged on, but inside the cafe, the moment felt strangely peaceful. "So, what's the story?" Logan asked gently, breaking the silence. He wasn't prying, but he genuinely wanted to know. There was something about Zara that intrigued him, something deeper than her sarcastic remarks and stubbornness. Zara looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly as if weighing whether to share. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now, softer. "I'm an artist," she said. "Or I was. I used to have a gallery, a studio, people who cared. But things got complicated." Her voice trailed off for a moment. "Life happened. I lost my space. I lost my support. And now, I'm just trying to make enough money to pay rent and keep my head above water. I make art on the streets now. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Sometimes people stop. Sometimes they don't. Mostly, they just walk past." Logan listened, his expression softening. He had heard stories like hers before, but somehow hearing it from her, from Zura, felt different. The depth of her resilience, The way she had built a life from the fragments of what had been struck him in a way he hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice sincere. "I had no idea." Zara shrugged, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't shown earlier. "I don't need pity," she said, the edge returning to her voice. But there was something gentler in it now. "I just need a break, a chance." Logan nodded, his mind racing. He had been so consumed with his own success, his own relentless pursuit of goals, that he had never paused to consider what it must be like to be on the other side, to not have the luxury of a steady paycheck, a secure future. He had everything, yet somehow, in that moment, it felt like Zara had something he didn't, the courage to face her world without pretending. "Maybe you'll get that chance," Logan said, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe we can help each other." Zara looked at him, her eyes still wary but also curious. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her tone lighter than before. "And how exactly would we do that?" Logan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Well," he said with a small smile, "let's just say I have a lot of connections in the art world. If you're interested, I might be able to help you get back on your feet, but only if you're willing to take a chance." Zara was silent for a long time, and for a moment, Logan wondered if she would turn down the offer. But then, just as he was about to say something else, she spoke. "All right," she said with a small, reluctant smile. "I'll take that chance." And in that moment, Logan realized that perhaps, for the first time in his life, he had stepped into a world that wasn't defined by wealth or status. Instead, it was a world where the storm outside no longer mattered, only the possibility of what might come next.